Imagine this. You are trapped in a cold stone room, under the biggest arena in the world. Above your head, 50,000 cheering Romans just watched your husband die fighting the lion. The crowd is leaving, the noise fading, the torches burning low. You think the worst is over. Then you hear footsteps, slow, heavy, coming straight toward you. A dark shape fills the doorway. It's the gladiator who survived today's bloody show. His body is covered in red, but almost none of it is his own. A guard unlocks your cell. The gladiator raises a hand and points at you, choosing you like a prize. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. For Rome, this was just another normal day. What comes next is the part of history school books avoid. The side of the Roman Empire that was never carved into marble or shown in Hollywood movies. The organized system that began when the crowd went home and the arena fell silent. This isn't rumor. Roman writers recorded it themselves. Archaeologists have found evidence scratched into walls below the Colosseum. Once you understand what truly happened in those tunnels, you will never look at ancient Rome the same way again. Hollywood shows gladiators as brave heroes fighting for honor and freedom. Spartacus, rebellion, brotherhood. But those stories hide what happened after the blood dried and the sand was swept clean. When the gates closed and the crowds vanished, the arena changed into something far darker. The public show turned into a private system Rome quietly depended on. Roman writers like Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca didn't describe it as shocking. They wrote about it casually, like they were talking about daily business. They mentioned women kept beneath the arenas, stored like supplies, handed out as rewards to successful fighters. Not as a metaphor, but literally. The Roman government ran it like a machine, the same way they built roads, aqueducts, and tax systems. Think about that. The same empire praised for architecture, law, and order also created a cold process that treated human suffering as normal. To them, a conquered woman wasn't a person anymore. She was property, something the state could give away when it wanted. And because she was legally classified as an object, anything done to her wasn't considered a crime. This was the real Rome, not just marble temples and heroic battles, but a system where victory in the arena came with a prize no one dares to talk about today. To understand how Rome reached this level of cruelty, you have to see how they treated conquered people from the very beginning. When Roman legions captured a city in Gaul, Britannia, or Judea, they didn't just win a battlefield. They processed an entire population like items moving down a factory line. Men who could fight were sent to mines or forced into the arena to die for entertainment. Children were sold in distant slave markets, never to see their families again. And women of childbearing age were labeled as captiva, or prizes owned by the state. Here is the terrifying part. Under Roman law, these women were no longer considered human. They were classified as res, a Latin word meaning thing. The same legal category as furniture, tools, or livestock. A conquered woman had fewer rights than a chair. You could use her, trade her, punish her, or destroy her, and it wasn't a crime. After all, you can't harm an object in the eyes of the law. But Rome didn't stop at legal dehumanization. They turned it into public theater. The games existed to show the world what happened to anyone who opposed the empire. When a captured chieftain fought a lion and died screaming in front of 50,000 people, it sent a message. Rome controls life and death. Rome owns you. And while the audience watched the spectacle above, something even darker waited below. Hidden from sight, but fully supported by the state. What happened in the arena during the midday break revealed the darkest side of Roman entertainment. When wealthy citizens went home for lunch, the games didn't pause. Instead, they turned even more twisted. Historians call these events fatal plays, where prisoners were forced to act out famous myths. Except the deaths were real. The poet Martial wrote about them the same way someone today might review a theater show. Barely reacting to the horror, he describes a prisoner dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician who could charm animals with his music. The man was led into the arena with a lyre, surrounded by curious spectators eating snacks. Then a trained bear was released. Martial comments almost jokingly that this time the music didn't save him, as the animal killed him in front of thousands. Another story he mentions is even more disturbing. A woman was forced to reenact a myth involving a sacred bull. In the real arena, this meant she was publicly assaulted by an animal until she died from her injuries, while the crowd watched as if it were part of the show. The Roman state designed these scenes on purpose. They advertised them on posters, families attended together, and vendors sold food in the stands. To Rome, this was normal entertainment. And this same machinery, this organized system of humiliation and control, was used to handle the women held beneath the arena. The same officials who arranged animal fights and stage effects managed the fate of the captives. The cruelty you saw on the sand was only the surface. The real nightmare waited below. Gladiators lived in a strange position within Roman society. They were slaves with almost no rights, owned by their trainers, fed and controlled like valuable animals. Yet at the same time, they were celebrities. Crowds shouted their names, artists painted their faces on walls, and women from wealthy families admired them in secret. In Pompeii, graffiti calls one fighter the heartthrob of the girls and another the pride of the ladies. There are records of noble women sneaking into gladiator barracks, bribing guards for private meetings. Some gladiators became so famous that their sweat was collected after fights, mixed with oil, and sold as a beauty treatment or love potion. That level of obsession shows how powerful their image was. But Rome never forgot the danger they represented. The memory of Spartacus haunted the empire. A small group of escaped gladiators had once built an army big enough to challenge Rome itself. For 2 years, they defeated legion after legion. When the rebellion was finally crushed, Rome lined the roads with thousands of crucified survivors as a warning. That fear stayed alive for generations. So Rome developed a system to control gladiators. They used both rewards and punishment, extra food, money, the promise of freedom after enough victories. But the most effective incentive was something more primal: access to the captives, kept beneath the arena. Ancient writers mention it casually, as if everyone already understood the practice. When you connect the fragments, a clear pattern appears. After a remarkable win, especially during major games funded by emperors or wealthy leaders, the surviving gladiator often received what sources describe as the privilege of the victor. And that privilege wasn't a trophy or money. It was a person, a captive woman locked in the darkness below. The process was chillingly organized, not chaotic or impulsive. After a major victory, the gladiator was escorted underground through the hypogeum, the maze of tunnels. Beneath the arena floor, he still wore his armor, still smelled of sweat and blood, the crowd's cheers echoing in his ears. Oil lamps flickered along the walls, casting long shadows over cages, machinery, and corridors stained by years of violence. A trainer or arena official walked with him, not as a guard, but as someone managing inventory. They passed animal pens and the lifts that carried beasts to the arena until they reached a separate section of small, narrow rooms. These chambers were not used for storage or staging. Archaeological digs in places like Capua, Pompeii, and under the Colosseum have revealed their purpose. Stone benches built at specific heights, iron rings fixed into walls near the floor and waist level, heavy doors reinforced with iron, locking only from the outside. In some rooms, chains were built directly into the stone. The women kept there were recorded in Roman documents as captiva damnata. Condemned were captives. They were logged in ledgers like livestock: age, health, origin, Germanic, British, Parthian, each assigned a number, not a name. Sources suggest the gladiator was either allowed to choose a cell or was simply assigned one. Like receiving equipment, the door would open, the woman brought out or the gladiator pushed inside, and then the lock slid shut again. What happened afterward was rarely written down. The text goes silent, as if the details were too ordinary to mention, but the architecture speaks clearly. The rings, the benches, the scratches carved desperately into the walls. This wasn't passion. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even chaos. It was a system designed, repeated, controlled. And in the eyes of Rome, nothing that happened in those rooms was considered a crime. Because the women inside were not considered people. They were state property, used as rewards the same way Rome handed out land or gold. This was the hidden cost of every cheer from the stands. The most disturbing proof of this system doesn't come from ancient writers. It comes from the stones themselves. When archaeologists first explored the tunnels beneath the Colosseum in the 1800s, they were focused on engineering elevators, trapdoors, animal cages. But as they cleared more debris, they found rooms that didn't fit any known purpose. Small chambers far from the main corridors, each about the size of a modern bedroom. Stone benches built along the walls, iron rings fixed into the masonry, doors reinforced with metal, locking only from the outside. Some walls showed deep scratches, as if someone desperately tried to claw their way out. At first, scholars argue these could have been holding rooms for animals or storage spaces. But animals don't leave fingernail marks. Storage rooms don't need chains bolted into stone. And they certainly don't require benches built at heights that align with a bound human body. Then researchers in Capua found graffiti inside similar chambers. Not proud messages from gladiators, but broken words carved by terrified captives. One scratched inscription reads, "I was Amelia of the Perganes. I saw my children die. Now I am nothing." Another message, written in a Celtic language, pleads, "To any god who hears me, let me die before tomorrow." These aren't official records. These are the voices Rome tried to erase. The layout of these rooms reveals something crucial. They weren't temporary or improvised. They were designed, built, and maintained for repeated use. Just like weapon storage areas or animal cages, they follow a standard pattern across multiple arenas in the empire. This wasn't the work of a single cruel official or one twisted emperor. It was infrastructure, a system planned by the state, a system expected to operate quietly, efficiently, and endlessly. And the fact that Rome invested money and engineering into creating these spaces shows how normal this practice was to them. It wasn't a scandal. It was routine. Now we reach the part history almost never mentions: the fate of the women trapped in the system. We don't have their letters or testimonies. Rome didn't care about their voices. All that remains are inventory lists written by officials, describing them the same way one would list cattle. Female, Germanic, around 20, healthy, assigned to arena holding. That was their identity. A number, a category, a body for these women. The nightmare began long before they reached the tunnels under the arena. They had watched their homes burn, their families killed or scattered, their children torn from their arms and sold far away. They were marched in chains across continents, displayed in markets, examined like animals, stripped of everything they once were. By the time they reached Rome, hope was already gone. In those underground cells, they could hear everything: the roar of crowds celebrating death, the screams of prisoners forced into fatal plays, the grinding of machinery lifting animals into the arena. They knew their turn would come, not for a public execution, but for something the state didn't even consider worth recording. There was no escape. Suicide was punished. Resistance meant torture. Their captors saw them not as humans, but as proof of Rome's dominance. Their suffering was a message to every conquered nation. Rome owns you. Rome owns your daughters. Rome owns your future. And the system didn't end because Rome felt guilt or developed morals. It died only when the empire collapsed and the supply of captives disappeared. The buildings remained. The chains remained. The scratches remained. The memory remained in the stone long after the voices were gone. Today, tourists walk the Colosseum's sandy floor, smiling for photos, admiring the architecture. Guides talk about gladiators, emperors, and engineering wonders. You mention the locked rooms below their feet, the ones built for silence, for suffering, for secrets. But they are still there, unchanged, waiting in the dark. This wasn't a rare horror. It was policy. It was infrastructure. It was normal. The Romans wanted the world to remember their victories. Not the price paid by the forgotten, but the walls remember. The iron remembers, the scratches remember. And now, you do too. If this revealed a part of history you never knew, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. We are not done. There are more truths hidden beneath the stories you were taught, truths the ancient world tried to bury. We will uncover them together.